When one thinks of Rome, one immediately imagines well-organized legions, marching with shields and swords, dominating everything in their path. But there was a moment in history when that wasn't enough. Rome, powerful as it was faced with a challenge from the other side of the map, the armored knights from the east. And these guys, they were of another level. Imagine a warrior on horseback, both covered in heavy armor, gleaming under the sun. It was like seeing a medieval tank, only with legs. They came with everything, throwing their huge spears with brutal force, and the worst? When they came in a group, they looked like a metal wall in motion. This type of warrior had been used for centuries by peoples such as the Persians, Assyrians, and even the Macedonians of Alexander the Great. They discovered that it wasn't enough to be fast or agile. Brute strength and total protection could turn the tide of a battle. Rome observed all this, and like any intelligent empire, it didn't take long for him to realize, if we want to keep winning, we're going to have to learn from them. Wait a minute. Before I continue, I need your help. YouTube only releases this video to more people. If it has a lot of interaction, that is, without your comment, this knowledge can be buried and never reach those who need it. If this content makes sense to you, comment If you disagree, comment 0 and tell me why. I want to see at least 100 comments here for YouTube to understand that this subject needs to be spread. Then comment now and be part of this mission to reveal the secrets of ancient Rome. Rome was not used to losing. The legions were feared, respected, and almost always victorious. But that changed in the year 53 BC in a battle that marked history, the Battle of Cavalry. There were the Romans, confident, marching with discipline, thinking that they would repeat the usual success. But on the other side, there was something different. The Parthians, an empire of the East, did not come with ordinary swords or round shields. They had a deadly combination: mounted archers, swift as the wind, and the terrifying Cataphracts, knights in armor so heavy they looked like they were made of pure iron. The strategy was simple and devastating. While the archers distracted, the Romans with a shower of arrows, the Cataphracts surrounded and crushed the legions with brutal force. Rome was surprised. For the first time, the famous Roman formation did not work, and the result? A humiliating defeat. One of those that hurts the pride of the empire. They lost men, territory, and above all the certainty that they were invincible. That's when Rome understood. You can't ignore the strength of heavy cavalry. If they wanted to survive in the East, they would have to evolve, and fast. After the beating in Carus, Roma did what he always knew how to do very well: observe, learn, and adapt. If the enemy had an advantage, Rome did not cry. She found a way to incorporate what worked and turn it into something even more effective. And that's exactly what happened. Instead of ignoring the Cataphracts, those virtually indestructible horsemen, Rome began to look around and think, who else knows how to fight like this? And the answer came from the Sarmatians, an Eastern European people known for their skill with heavy cavalry. These guys were born almost on top of the horse and fought as if they were part of the animal. Rome began to recruit these allies into the army. But not only that, he also began to train his own soldiers in this new style of combat. Heavy armor, long spears, closed formation, and an impact force that looked like thunder arriving on the battlefield. It was then that the first, real Roman Cataphracts began to appear. They were not exactly the same as the Parthians, but they already showed that Rome was reinventing itself. In other words, defeat became a teacher, and Roma learned its lesson. Rome had begun to reinvent itself, but every good idea needs to be tested on the battlefield. And the chance came during the Great Jewish Revolt, in the year 67 AD. In this conflict, the empire faced fierce resistance from Jewish groups that did not accept Roman domination. It was a tense scenario, with urban combat, ambushes, and a war, without fixed rules. Rome needed impact, strength, and presence, and that's when the Cataphracts first showed up. But calm down, they were not yet 100% official Roman troops. They were local allies, troops sent by kings from the east who supported Rome. These knights were already equipped with armor and mounts trained for heavy warfare. Even though they were not part of the fixed army, they made an impact. Their presence in the countryside frightened the rebels, created breaches, and reinforced Roman rule. It was as if Rome was saying, "Look what we have now, and this is just the beginning." This participation was a clear sign. Cataphracts were gaining ground. Rome was preparing to go further, to create its own, permanent, and even more powerful units. If this content is making sense to you so far, do this. Give me a sign. Comment 1 below so I know you're with me on this journey. And remember, YouTube only spreads this knowledge if it has a lot of interaction. If you haven't commented yet, now is the time. I want to see this video full of opinions so that this topic continues to reach more people. Up until now, Rome had been testing heavy cavalry piecemeal, but it was only during the rule of Emperor Hadrian that things got really serious. Hadrian was not just another emperor. He was a strategist, an observer, and knew that the East was a constant threat. Rome's enemies, such as the Parthians and the Sassanids, were increasingly organized and aggressive, and they used Cataphracts masterfully. It was then that Adriano hit the hammer. It was no longer possible to depend only on allies or improvisations. Rome needed its own cataphractic units, fully Roman, trained, equipped, and prepared to take on the best horsemen in the world. These new troops were positioned in strategic locations, such as Moesia Inferior, a critical region of the empire, bordering the east. It was here that tensions boiled over, and so it was the ideal place to test the new cavalry elite. Of course, it was still the beginning. These early units didn't have all the full armor that we would see later, but it was already a watershed. Rome wasn't just copying, it was creating its own version of brute force on 4 legs. Now think with me. Create a warrior covered in iron, mounted on an armored horse. It's not cheap. Each cataphract needed a real arsenal just to wear it. The armor was not simple. It involved bronze or iron scales, chainmail, heavy helmets, and, most impressively, protections for the horse as well. There was so much metal that at times the horse looked like a dragon ready for war. But all this had a cost, not only to do but also to maintain. In times of war, if a part of the armor broke or was damaged, it wasn't like changing a piece of clothing. It needed specialized labor, expensive materials, time, and a lot of logistical effort. And there was more. Weight. The horses suffered. No matter how trained they were, carrying it all over long distances was exhausting. They got tired faster, slower, and vulnerable in certain terrains. That is, despite being almost indestructible on the front line, cataphracts were not ideal for any situation. And Rome began to realize that if it wanted to keep these kinds of troops running, it would have to balance brute force with efficiency. That's when the next adaptation came. Rome was never an empire that gave up easily. When he realized that the armor of the cataphracts was too heavy and too expensive to maintain on a large scale, he did what he knew best. He adjusted the strategy. Instead of abandoning the idea, the Romans began to develop lighter versions of cataphracts. Some units wore partial armor. They protected only the most vulnerable parts of the body and horse. This reduced weight and allowed for more mobility, even if the rider was a little more exposed. But Rome went further. They began to combine forces. They kept the cataphracts as a front line, to break enemy formations with brutal impact, and used auxiliary troops such as mounted archers and light cavalry to provide support. While the heavies advanced slowly like a giant hammer, the light moved fast, flanking the enemy, firing from afar, making room for the cataphracts to do the dirty work. This balance between strength and agility became a hallmark of Roman tactics at the end of the empire. And even with all the limitations, cataphracts continued to be respected and feared. One thing is certain: the cataphract did not enter the field to play. These elite knights not only came covered in heavy armor, but also used impressive weapons, the main one being the contus, a giant two-handed spear about 4 meters long. Imagine this: a knight running towards you, on top of a horse also protected by metal, holding a spear so long that it looked like a sharp tree. The impact was so brutal that it only took a single blow to knock down a man or even another horse. The spear became an extension of his own body and of Rome's fury. But they didn't stop there. If the Contus broke or was useless in the midst of the chaos, the Cataphract still had a longsword, the spathe, and a dagger. It was as if each one was a fighting machine prepared for any scenario. And to master all this, years of heavy training. The guy needed to have technique, strength, endurance, and a cool head. Not just anyone turned Cataphract. It took time, discipline, and of course enough cold blood to face the chaos head-on with more than 30 kilos of armor on his body. They were not just soldiers. They were elite symbols. Warriors trained to fight to the last breath. Being a Cataphract wasn't just about putting on nice armor and riding in slow motion like in the movies. It was tough, the kind that only the best could handle. These soldiers went through intense training, which began well before they even touched a spear. First, they had to prove that they were good knights, with poise, control, and endurance. Then came the training with armor, which was not light at all. It was necessary to have strength and breath to fight for hours wearing all that. In addition, the exercises simulated real battles. Formations, charges, hand-to-hand combat. Everything timed, adjusted, repeated dozens of times. It was iron discipline, literally. And why so much effort? Because the Cataphracts were not just any troops. They were the kind of soldiers that Rome used when things got ugly, when it was necessary to crush resistance with full force. Being chosen for this role was a privilege, but also a huge responsibility. You couldn't hesitate, you couldn't make mistakes, and above all, I couldn't stop. It was the top of the assembled military hierarchy. And those who got there knew that they were fighting not only with their bodies, but with the reputation of all Rome on their backs. As time passed, the world around Rome began to change. Wars have gotten faster, enemies more unpredictable, and the coffers of the empire more and more empty. Keeping Cataphracts required a lot: money, time, training, expensive armor, and strong horses. And as Rome began to face barbarian invasions, internal crises, and changing military tactics, maintaining these elite units became increasingly difficult. Even so, they resisted for a long time. During the reigns of emperors such as Diocletian and Constantine, Cataphracts were still essential, especially in the battles against the Sassanids in the east. But their time was coming to an end. Wars now required lighter, faster, more adaptable troops. The era of heavy cavalry, as it was, gave way to new forms of combat. But the Cataphracts did not disappear from the map. Quite the opposite. They left a huge legacy, which inspired medieval knights, those we know as the famous armored paladins of the stories of the Middle Ages. The concept of a mounted, devastating, respected armored warrior, all of this came from there, from the seed planted by the Roman Cataphracts. So if you enjoyed getting to know this powerful and little talked about part of Rome's history, like this video now. This helps the channel grow a lot and brings more content like this to you. And comment below. What other type of Roman troop or battle would you like to see here? Before leaving, take a look at the video on the screen, because there's a lot more hidden history coming. See you in the next video.